We begin this evening with Israel and the Middle East. President Obama met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House today. It was the first of a series of meetings the Obama administration will have with leaders from the Middle East. The president is said to be preparing a new peace plan that will engage the entire region. In June, he will travel to Cairo, Egypt, to make a major address to the Arab and Muslim world. Speaking to reporters after the meeting, President Obama urged all parties to seize the moment.
I suggested to the Prime Minister that he has a historic opportunity to get a serious movement on this issue during his tenure. That means that all the parties involved have to take seriously obligations that they previously agreed to. Those obligations were outlined in the roadmap. They were discussed extensively in Annapolis, and I think that we can, there is no reason why we should not seize this opportunity.
The president also said that diplomacy with Iran would not be open-ended.
It hasn't been tried before, so we don't want to prejudge that. But as I said, by the end of the year, I think we should have some sense as to whether or not these discussions are starting to yield significant benefits, whether we're starting to see serious movement on the part of the Iranians.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has not endorsed a two-state solution, said he would resume negotiations, but expects Palestinians to recognize Israel as a Jewish state.
If we resume negotiations, as we plan to do, then I think that the Palestinians will have to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. We'll have to also enable Israel to have the means to defend itself. And if those conditions are met, if Israel's security conditions are met, and there's recognition of Israel's legitimacy, its permanent legitimacy, then I think we can envision an arrangement where Palestinians and Israelis live side by side in dignity, in security, and in peace.
Joining me from Washington, Jim Hoagland of the Washington Post. With me here in New York, Rashid Khalidi of Columbia University, Lally Weymouth of Newsweek magazine, and Bret Stephens of the Wall Street Journal. I am pleased to have each of them. I begin in Washington with Jim Hoagland. Tell me what was accomplished today, as far as you can tell, in conversation with whomever you talked to, Jim.
Well, I've had a chance to talk to both sides of the conversation. It's interesting that neither side is willing to say that there was a clear meeting of the minds between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu. But at the same time, it's also very clear that both sides sought to prevent painting themselves into any kind of corner with each other, that they did not want to insult the future, that they both recognize that they've got a long and difficult road ahead, and there's no point in getting into big arguments now. So the meeting itself went on for about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, which was at least half an hour longer than was expected. I couldn't quite establish whether that was because there was more agreement or more disagreement than was expected. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu went in with the idea of emphasizing the threat that Iran poses, and he got some feeling back, I'm told, that the President recognizes the danger of a nuclear Iran. The President is committed to the goal of preventing that. But the President, for his part, wanted to emphasize to Netanyahu that it would make life a lot easier for the United States and for the Arab regimes, the Arab states that the United States is counting on to join in a peaceful settlement, make life a lot easier for everybody if the Palestinian question could be, if not immediately settled, at least major progress made on that. I'm not sure he got to home plate with Prime Minister Netanyahu with that idea, but that was the way he presented it.
Did he get on base?
I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is someone...
Taking the sports analogy further.
Exactly. Prime Minister Netanyahu is not easily moved. He came in, I think, feeling that this re-election has vindicated him to a great extent, feeling that we are at a historic moment in many ways, because he believes that moderate Arab states, he would say almost all Arab states, fear Iran much more than they fear Israel today. And that gives us an opportunity to build a secure relationship between the United States and Israel, first of all, and then with moderate Arab states. So I don't think he was moved greatly down the base path, Charlie.
Including settlements?
Most of all, perhaps, settlements. I think the Prime Minister felt that one area of difference, if not outright disagreement, was that the President feels that there is a moment here that we have to seize with Iran. There is a moment that we can show real progress on the Palestinian part, and it requires Israel to stop settlements, to freeze settlements. But the Prime Minister came back with a very strong argument, I'm told, that that is not the key to the Middle East, and that we have to have movement by the Palestinians, by the Arab states, and by Israel simultaneously on all fronts, not just on settlements. If you were able to press him on whether or not he's ever willing to stop settlements, I don't think you would have gotten a clear answer.
All right. The other question is the two-state endorsement of the two-state.
He did not offer such an endorsement in the meeting or in conversations with others afterwards.
What do you think the Arab world and the Palestinians are looking for from this man who they have some familiarity with?
I think the Arab governments may be looking for something somewhat different than what Arabs generally and the Palestinians are interested in. I think most people in the Arab world have no expectations of Netanyahu, positive expectations.
There's no Nixon going to China thing here.
No, I think with some Arab governments there may be. I think Netanyahu may be right. There are Arab governments very divorced from and opposed by, in most cases, their own peoples, which are very worried about Iran. I think he is right about that. But they're also terribly worried, not so much about Israel, but about the destabilizing effect of what Israel does in the occupied territories in terms of their own public opinion. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, each in different ways. Worries, I think, as do most of the Gulf countries, about the destabilizing impact of the next round, assuming that there's no progress, and heaven forbid there is a next round, on their own domestic stability, which is what they mostly care about. So Mubarak is not, I think, frankly, terribly worried about the diplomatic aspect, as much as he's worried about staying in power. In terms of Jordan, it's even more critical, given the large proportion of Palestinians in the population. And even in Saudi Arabia, it's clear that public opinion was boiling in December and January. So to say the Arabs, well, the Arab governments is one thing, but they worry a lot about their public opinion. They're not democratic regimes. They're regimes that have limited legitimacy, ruled through police state methods. And they worry about these things. And so I would say there's a big gulf between public opinion, which has, I think, very low expectations of Netanyahu, and the governments that really would like President Obama to move this prime minister somewhere.
Are those, regardless of the differences within the Arab world, are they worried that the United States is its primacy or its indication that it considers the relationship with Iran crucial and the most important sort of endeavor for this government in the Middle East?
I think there are some governments, if this is what you're asking, I'm not sure. There are some governments in the Gulf, and I think the Saudi government in particular, that are very worried about an American-Iranian rapprochement. And I'm not sure that that extends very far beyond that, because a lot of problems would be solved if there really were a rapprochement. I mean, Egypt is only worried about internal security. If Hamas is in some way neutralized as a result of an American-Iranian deal, they don't care, whereas enhanced Iranian influence in the Gulf is a worry for Gulf countries in a different way than it would be for, say, Egypt or Jordan. So I would say even there are differences on this.
Lally, what do you think that the Prime Minister wanted to impress upon our new president?
Well, I think that the Prime Minister, and I think many Israelis, not just Netanyahu, are really extremely concerned about Iran and the Iranian nuclear threat. I think they feel that time is running out and that it is the greatest threat to the region and to the other moderate Arab states, including Egypt. And I think, from what I understand, President Mubarak and the King of Jordan share this view. And I've heard some of those people express the view, even the Arab leaders, whom he rightly says fear a nuclear Iran and fear the destabilization that a nuclear Iran would mean not only to Israel but to the region, because it would set off an arms race. I think Egypt would probably build nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia would probably build nuclear weapons. And I think Netanyahu is not making a false argument and saying to President Obama, this is the real problem in the area. And I'm really not sure if, after all, Israel evacuated Gaza, tore down every settlement, And what did it get? It got 8 years of its cities being bombed. And I'm really not sure if they gave up every piece of territory and said here to the Palestinians, I'm not sure the Iranians would say, great, we don't want to build a nuclear bomb after all. I just don't think that really is a quid pro quo.
There is this emphasis now on Jewish state, recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Is that new?
No.
That underlying Jewish state is not new?
No.
Okay.
Because Israel perceives itself as the state for the Jewish people.
But you could see the inflection in Netanyahu's answer.
But as a demand on the Arabs, surely it's new. I mean, it's never been a condition. The PLO wasn't asked to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. The PLO was asked to recognize Israel.
Let's bear something in mind. Israel came into existence by a UN resolution as a Jewish state.
Absolutely.
You look at the text of Harry Truman's recognition of Israel 12 minutes after it declared its independence, and it is the Jewish state.
That's the partition plan. You're absolutely right.
This is the key point. This is the existential issue. And part of what I think is happening is a kind of a battle of fine print diplomacy. The Arabs offered this, the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002, and it said full normalization and, oh, by the way, wrapped up in the title of a UN resolution, the right of return to Palestinian refugees. The Israeli thrust or counter-thrust is to say, by all means, let's talk about two states, but Israel has to be recognized as it was conceived as a Jewish state. That is the crux of the matter. That is where a deal will be framed or it will fall apart.
And no right of return is the key Israeli condition. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, the idea is that if you're going to have a Palestinian state, that is the state to which the Palestinians should return.
Not to Israel.
Not in addition to Ramallah, to Tel Aviv, and Jaffa, and Haifa, and so on.
The Palestinians want the right of return to Israel proper, even if Israel were to withdraw to the 67
border. The question that needs to be answered here is, do we have a territorial conflict or do we have an existential conflict? The question Israelis ask themselves is this about 1967 or is this about 1948? And that's why the whole issue of a Jewish state is so central, because if the Arab world isn't prepared to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, we're right back at the partition plan of 48, 47. If it's simply a territorial issue, if it's simply a matter of withdrawing, tearing down the settlements, that's doable. When it becomes existential, it becomes impossible.
Does this make it a lot more difficult?
Does what make it a lot more difficult?
The emphasis on a Jewish state.
It did not start in 1967, this conflict. It started in 1948. More than half of the Palestinians are refugees because of what happened in 1948. If you don't address their grievances, you can make peace with the people of the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and the Palestinians living inside Israel, perhaps. But you have all those other Palestinians to deal with.
This opens up an enormous can of worms.
No,
because then do you have restitution?
Come in, Jim, 1 second. Yeah.
Brett, it was opened up when these people were expelled in 1948, and that has to be closed. There has to be closure.
Well, it was opened up when the Arab world rejected the UN partition plan. I mean, that's really the genesis of this. But I mean, this is in a way a kind of a distraction. We can have an endless argument about history.
But I think we should stick to today. I still think that I still think Mahmoud Abbas is actually a really a very impressive person. I think Salim Fayyad, the Palestinian Prime Minister, is a very impressive person. I believe the Israeli government agrees with that. But the problem is they're weaker than Hamas, from what I can understand.
They're weaker than Hamas for reasons that we might as well talk about. They've completely failed to achieve anything from government after government after government of the State of Israel.
All right, let me get Jim back in. I'll come back. Jim?
Okay.